Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with 12 works by major composers that have only come into their own since the turn of the 21st century. This is a really interesting list, and it tells us, I think, some very interesting facts about where music is headed as we continue into the new millennium. I mean, think about it. It's already a quarter over, which is kind of amazing. So we're cruising along. Maybe we're talking about the 22nd century. Who knows? But these are major works by major composers that didn't get a lot of play. But in every era, there are certain pieces that have been neglected or that remain undiscovered for whatever reason by some really big names, and that have gotten discovered. We're going to talk about why and how, and where we're going because of this, starting with Sibelius's Kullervo. Now, Kullervo, as you may know by now, is a huge choral symphony that Sibelius disregarded, except for a couple movements of it. Basically, he never revised it, and he didn't sanction performances of it regularly after its initial premieres. He went on to other things. It was an early work from the early 1890s, or even a little bit before. He wrote some of it when he was still a student in Vienna, and it's extraordinary. It's fabulous. It reveals the young Sibelius with all of his quirks and idiosyncrasies and genius as well. It's really quite something. And it's about an hour and 20 minutes long. It's similar to something like Liszt's Faust Symphony or one of those mid-19th century choral symphonies. And it's spectacular. But it wasn't recorded, until Pavel Berglund got a hold of it back in the 70s or somewhere around there with the Bournemouth Symphony, and he did it a couple more times. But since then, first of all, a critical edition has been published. Before the critical edition came out, it was rather difficult to play. I have the old score. It's a manuscript, and it's a mess, and it required some serious editorial work before people could actually play the whole thing. So there was that issue. Only pieces of it were published separately, and it really is a wonderful piece. But the other issue is that it was hard to find a male choir and a couple soloists who were ready to sing in Finnish. Well, that's not so much a problem anymore. In fact, most choirs will learn to sing it in its original tongue, which is, I think, pretty amazing. I saw the Brooklyn Philharmonic do it under Robert Spano, and it was a really fine performance, and they sang it in Finnish, and it wasn't a problem. They got through it somehow, and the performance itself was terrific. So it's doable. And once it's been decided that it's doable, well, the floodgates opened and recordings started coming willy-nilly. There must be I don't know, there must have been at least 10, 11, maybe a dozen recordings since the turn of the 20th century, or 8 or 9, or plenty. Venska's done it twice. When people start doing things twice, right? Segerstam did it twice, once for Chandos, once for Ondine. Spano recorded it in Atlanta for Telarc, the label that was, famous for doing like pictures at an exhibition and like just the popular classics and crazy sound, the 1812 Overture. And for them to do Sibelius's Kullervo, yeah, it's really something. So Jorma Panula did it on Naxos, and there's just been a wonderful outpouring of love for this early work of Sibelius. And that's a 21st century, effectively a late 21st century phenomenon. So we're in good shape there. I think we are anyway, or at least it's nice that it was discovered. Next, Prokofiev, Piano Concerto number 2. Now, the second piano concerto used to show up, in sets of the complete piano concertos, because of course you had to do it if you wanted to do the complete piano concerti. Prokofiev's piano concerti were only popular, only 2 of them were popular, numbers 1 and really number 3. All the others were sort of out there. But the greatest of them all, I think most people now agree, is number 2. And it wasn't getting much attention. It really wasn't. But then all of a sudden, people woke up and they realized, wow, there's this huge 4-movement concerto with a completely insane first movement cadenza and virtuosity to burn, and it just wasn't getting played. And everybody took it into their repertoire. Now everybody does it. I mean, I've never seen the fortunes of a piece of music change as quickly as they have for Prokofiev's Second Piano Concerto. And good, it's a great piece. It used to be something that was hard to find. There was the Ancherl one, on Supraphone. There were a couple Russian ones in complete cycles. When Ashkenazy did the complete piano concerto, number 2 is in there, but people didn't care because they wanted to hear number 3. It's very, very interesting how that's all changed. So the Prokofiev Second Piano Concerto has really made a comeback. Needed to make a comeback. It was never there to begin with, so it's made a welcome appearance, I guess you'd call it. It's just now one of the great concerti that people play all the time, and thank goodness. That's wonderful. Next, Bruckner. Everything. I've made a ton of videos about the Bruckner symphonies and the phenomenon that he represents, and it is a 21st century thing. Bruckner is the big German symphonist that everybody has discovered that only specialist conductors, cranky old German people, were paying attention to. And now everybody's doing it. And a lot of people are doing it badly. So you can look at those videos in the Bruckner playlist and we can discuss the whole phenomenon there. I'm not going to do it again. Just let it be said that his popularity among performers anyway, not necessarily audiences, is a new thing. And it's a wonderful thing by and large. I mean, Bruckner is a very great composer and his symphonies are marvelous and people should enjoy them. But it's going to be one of those situations, I have a feeling, where people do them because they can, not because they should. In other words, the cocaine hippo syndrome. But in any case, the Bruckner year is past us now. And so we can get rid of all those lousy Bruckner cycles by Thielemann and people like that and stick with the good stuff. There's enough now that we can sort through it and figure out who really knows what they're doing and who doesn't. So that's that. Next, oh yes, early music. I mean, certain works of early music have penetrated into the modern consciousness in a way that was absolutely impossible several decades ago. One of the greatest of those is the Monteverdi Vespers, an absolutely stunning piece of sacred music, which, it was recorded in the 50s and 60s and 70s and around. But again, it has benefited from new modern editions of the work, from all of the research that the historically informed performance people have been doing into how to play that music, into the familiarity, the familiarity that musicians have now with playing it well and rendering it expressive and enjoyable and, supplementing the bits that the composers, didn't write down in all that much detail. All of those issues have been resolved. And as a result of that, any serious choral society or organization that has, access to an instrumental ensemble as well can do a very respectable performance of the Monteverdi Vespers. It's becoming a popular work, and it should be, because it's magnificent. But that, too, is a 21st century phenomenon, end of the 20th, beginning of the 21st. And it's a wonderful addition to the repertoire of great sacred music. Next, 2 very interesting concertos by Dvorak. This has been a fascinating thing for me to watch because I've always loved these works. And they've always been recorded. They've always been out there on the periphery of the repertoire. But boy, have they taken off. Much more so than I ever could have expected. Dvorak was known as a one concerto guy, right? He wrote the cello concerto, the greatest cello concerto ever for the instrument. Hands down. It really is. It's an amazing work. And you would think that given the fact that he wrote 2 other concerti, one for violin and one for piano, that they would at least excite more interest than they did in the past few years. But not until the past, couple of decades. The violin concerto particularly has now entered the repertoire of most violinists who are serious about their craft. Before that, it was a specialty work. Violinists like Joseph Suk recorded it. Other violinists did it. Isaac Stern did it. Nathan Milstein did it. But no one cared. The recordings didn't stay in print for very long. They were deleted, and the work had a terrible reputation because Dvorak revised it a couple times because he wrote it for Joachim, and Joachim kept rejecting it. And finally, Joachim said, "Well, you have to redo the first movement so that it's a big, long, fully symphonic classical form first movement. And Dvorak's publisher said, why don't you try that? Maybe Joachim will go for it. And Dvorak said, no. He dug at his heels and said, no, this is the way I want it to be. And Dvorak was right. Because as it stands now, you have a beautiful, fiery, passionate first movement that segues into a gorgeously lyrical slow movement. And then a finale, which is as long as the first movement. Every movement's the same length. They're all like 9 minutes long, 10 minutes long. And it's the perfect finale for the work. It is effortless and it functions. And unlike so many romantic concerto finales, which are kind of like patchy and it's absolutely perfect. Dvorak saves the best for last. And that's what makes it so wonderful. And nobody cared or noticed. I mean, when you listen to it, it's one of the most formally perfect, beautifully balanced concertos of the entire Romantic period. And finally, people figured it out. So now it's everywhere. And oh, that's a good thing. I've seen it live several times now. It's wonderful that people do it. Thank God. And Sophie Mutter did it. Yay! Even the German people got a hold of it. No, seriously. It's great. It's great that the piece is getting the attention that it really, really deserves. So that's a wonderful discovery. Also, Dvorak's Piano Concerto, which isn't as popular as the Violin Concerto, certainly not among pianists, because it was always considered to be almost pianistically ungrateful, which it is, by the way. But Dvorak was he played the viola, actually, but he was also a keyboardist and an organist. He certainly understood how to write for the piano. And it was nonetheless revised and played in a Baudelarized version for many, many decades. Rudolf Firkužny finally got the thing under his belt, and he was the representative of the Dvorak Piano Concerto. Although Bernstein recorded it with Justus Franz, I think. It's a terrible performance. But Firkužny was the guy. He made 4 or 5 recordings of it, including the original version finally. And now people play it in its original version most of the time. And it is a beautiful romantic concerto. Brahms admired it. I mean, why not do it? It has terrific tunes. It's a fascinating work from a formal and aesthetic point of view. It's a mixture of kind of Mozart, Beethoven, and later romantic stuff. And some people think it's kind of a hybrid. So what? It is. And we love it. And it's gotten recorded many, many, many times in the past few decades. And great. So let's hope its rediscovery signals a permanent return to the repertoire, because it certainly deserves to be heard that way. It's a terrific piece. Next is a work that may surprise you, but I think when you think about it, you'll agree with me. It's Bach's Goldberg Variations. Yes, the Goldberg Variations. Well, remember, when Glenn Gould recorded the Goldberg Variations, or Wanda Landowska, or whatever, these were special things. They were rare. They were unusual. Yes, there were always people around who were doing these things, but they were unusual. It was not normal to do the Goldberg Variations. Now everybody does the Goldberg Variations, and not just on harpsichord, on piano. Modern pianists are expected at some point in their lives to record or concertize with the Goldberg Variations. It's become a standard keyboard work for everybody, and that to me is really quite remarkable, because it was a very, very unusual work. That's why Glenn Gould picked it to launch his career with Sony, because it was so out there. It was just nowadays, it's, oh God, not another Goldberg Variations. Oh, here they are doing another one. Oh, it's another one. It's endless. Really astonishing. And that is a modern phenomenon. It is the Bach work that has penetrated the consciousness of concertgoers everywhere. And if you say Goldberg Variations, everyone goes, oh yeah, sure, the Goldberg Variations. That thing that was on the Silence of the Lambs. Mm-hmm. Tells you how far we've come, doesn't it? And there's something a little bit on the rarer side. Szymanowski's First Violin Concerto. Now, there aren't that many great violin concerti. We know that. From the Romantic period, there are half a dozen, maybe, right? You've got start with Beethoven and Brahms and Mendelssohn and Sibelius and Bruch number 1 and then you find, now we have the Dvorak. That's nice. Elgar sometimes. There aren't a lot of them. They're really Tchaikovsky, Forget that one. But that's it, right? I mean, it's basically the romantic repertoire in a nutshell. I mean, there are lots of other concertos, of course, but popular ones or ones that get played regularly. So violinists were always looking for new repertoire. And Szymanowski wrote 2 violin concertos. One is a sort of folk-like, his later one is a more rhythmic and Bartokian kind of work. And the first one comes from his luscious, decadent, late romantic sex and sleaze period. It's wonderful. It's in one movement. And, the violin is spending the whole time playing at the very top of its register. And it's just full of gorgeous, yearning, sensual, post-Wagnerian harmony, luminously scored. I mean, what is not to love? And violinists found it in the past 10 or 15 years or so. There have been a good half a dozen recordings of it all of a sudden. And I've seen it live a couple times, too, which is really kind of surprising. I mean, people actually play because it's not an easy work. It's not easy to play. It's not easy for the orchestra and for the violin and orchestra to coordinate. So it takes rehearsal. You can't just show up and do it like people do these romantic concertos that they all know like the back of their hands. So that's been a real discovery. It's a very good thing for a wonderful composer who still doesn't get the attention that he probably deserves. His output wasn't huge, and he was, somewhat, different in style, but boy, is that a great concerto. It's absolutely wonderful. And it's been great hearing many new recordings of it and seeing it live. A very exciting 21st century phenomenon. Vaughan Williams Job, also a 21st century phenomenon because it was owned by Adrian Bolt. I mean, he just owned the work. He made 4 recordings of it, I think. And then, there was Vernon Handley, who was sort of Adrian Bolt light. I know Handley fans will get hysterical when I say that, but that's what is the truth. He did mostly the same stuff, mostly British repertoire. He explored stuff that Bolt didn't explore, but in Vaughan Williams, of course, he was in the same general bathtub, and it was hard to discern his individuality. But now, Job is widely regarded, of course, as one of Vaughan Williams' greatest masterpieces, and it is. And it's been recorded stunningly well by Andrew Davis twice, if I'm not mistaken, at least twice. And Andrew Mancy just did a wonderful performance of it quite recently. It's great that it's getting an outing and it's getting heard. It's still sort of the province of British conductors exclusively. I wish others would start doing it more. I would love to hear Leonard Slatkin do it, for example, or some of the other really fine conductors who conduct British music. Andrew Litton could do it really well. There are plenty of conductors out there who I think could do a wonderful job with the work, and they should. It should get much more attention, and hopefully will continue to get much more attention. But it's very, very good that there are so many performances available now. There's a Halle one with Mark Elder. There's a whole bunch of them, which is great. Absolutely great, because it's one of the composer's best pieces. After Job, Shostakovich Symphony No. 4. Oh, yes. This piece was only heard in the context of complete Shostakovich symphony cycles, plus Andrei Previn with Chicago, which is still the reference recording for the work, in my view. Now, of course, there have been a lot more Shostakovich symphony cycles, but there have also been individual performances of the Fourth Symphony by the likes of Leonard Slatkin and Simon Rattle, and it really is a phenomenal piece of music, an extraordinary piece of music. And instead of doing it with sort of apologies and grouping it with numbers 2 and 3, which nobody really likes as part of his experimental first period, people are really viewing it as they should, which is as the gateway to his work as a great symphonist. It's an extraordinary piece of music, and I've seen it live now several times. I mean, it gets played. And it's great. It's also benefited from the vogue of Mahler because it uses an orchestra that's quite similar in size. 8 horns and quadruple winds and lots of stuff. And so orchestras that are, well enough constituted logistically to put on a Mahler symphony can certainly do Shostakovich's Fourth. And so they kind of come as a package sometimes. But yeah, wow, what a wonderful discovery that is. Meanwhile, going back again to the early music world, after we talked about the Monteverdi Vespers, how about Gesualdo's Tenebrae Responsories? What are Tenebrae Responsories? Well, yeah, that's music for Holy Week, essentially. It's dark music for Holy Week. And, it's always going to be music for connoisseurs. But Gesualdo, remember, he was crazy and he murdered his wife and her lover and then spent the rest of his life hiding out and flagellating himself and whatnot. And his music is extremely harmonically advanced and strange. And his tenebrae responsories are, there's, first of all, they're sacred music, which is always good. You can say they're spiritual. That's a selling point. But, they are harmonically like the rest of his music. Very, very, very crepuscular and advanced and spooky and beautiful. Extremely hauntingly beautiful, if somewhat austere. And these amazing chamber choirs that exist today, there's so many of them now, especially in Germany and Scandinavia. These fantastic chamber choirs, small groups run by people like Daniel Royce and Marcus Creed and they're just amazing. Tony Kaljusti and people like that. They just do exceptional work with this type of music. There's Harry, what's his name? The 16. Those people, really amazing. And they've taken to doing Gesualdo's tenebrae responsories because it's a really distinctive piece of music, a body of work. One of the problems with doing that early music is that for most people, it's all going to kind of sound the same. And it does. I mean, you have to really get to know it to begin to hear the subtleties that distinguish one composer from the next. It's 300 or 400 years worth of music. It's an extraordinary body of work. And there are huge differences in style between schools of composition and whatnot, but they all take work to get used to and a lot of listening. But with Gesualdo and his tenebrae responsories, oh, yes, you can right away begin to hear just how distinctive the music is. And that's what makes it so special. That's why these groups are recording it, because you can listen to it right away and say, okay, I've got something that I can readily identify as extraordinary. So that is a 21st century phenomenon, absolutely. And a lot of other repertoire from the same period, a lot of other composers, is also in this category. But I think the Gesualdo works are iconic exemplars of what has been done and what will continue to be done as we proceed into further epochs. So there's that. And last but not least, oh yes, the Korngold Violin Concerto. What a great piece that is. Isn't it fun? I mean, it's just great. And it was one of those works that, Heifetz did it and nobody else. And then Ulf Schirmer, I think it was, did it, with Kempe or someone like that, or Heinrich Hohlreiser. I don't know. It was on EMI. There was one other recording of the Korngold Violin Concerto. Then finally, Perlman got his hands on it with Andre Previn. And then Previn redid it with Anna-Sophie Mutter, and Gil Shaham did it, and all these other people started doing the Korngold Violin Concerto all of a sudden. I only saw it live once with Daniel Majeski and the Cleveland Orchestra under Dochnani. It was an attempt for an opportunity for the concertmaster to strut his stuff. Very good performance. It's a great work. It's luscious and it's romantic, and the vogue for film music has also created a vogue for Korngold's orchestral works, his late orchestral works, particularly since all the themes in the concerto come from his film scores, principally Another Dawn and The Prince and the Pauper. So that's a concerto that has returned to the repertoire, or has entered the repertoire recently, and only in the 21st century, and good. And it's a wonderful work to wind up this sort of this conversation with, because one of the things you will see when you look at the list is that it's the soloists who are doing it. The soloists who are in search of new repertoire and interesting repertoire and things that they can do and make their own to characterize their own careers, their own sound, their own aesthetics. Thank God for the soloist. Why? Because they belong to a provenance of performance which is entirely separate from what's happening with conductors who are sort of getting snookered by the period instrument movement and who are desperate to play the same old stuff in a way that's different because they have to do something different. They don't have the same, it seems to me, the same freedom of choice that the soloists do, to find these works and make them their own, that operate within the style, the grand romantic tradition that these soloists were trained in. And so they will be the ones who preserve what we might call the traditional romantic aesthetic, I think. Not the conductors. The conductors, I don't think, have a clue. There isn't the same kind of pedigree in conducting. There are schools of conducting, yes, there are, but not in the same way that there are schools of playing, and a repertoire for those people who play. Anyway, it's just something I've noticed coming into this. So what we're going to find, I think, is that much of the discoveries and new stuff and excitement and hopefully continuation of the grand tradition that was, I mean, that's what these pieces are. That's what they were written for, is going to be, it's going to be perpetuated by the soloists. And maybe they'll force the conductors to come along with them, because I just think most of the conductors today are almost clueless. I really do, when it comes to what to do, how to identify themselves, how to make what they do sound special. I'm at a loss to try and make any suggestions as to what these people can do about it. I really don't know. But thank God for the soloists. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.